Okay. Elizabeth, are you set on Instagram over there or what's going on? You have a
Yeah,
green check
looks like
mark.
I'm on.
All right. Well, let's get rolling. Go ahead. Take it away.
All right. Hi, everyone. Happy New Year. You're joining Kara Francis and I to continue our money conversation. So, you joined us last year now. We started our money conversation series just talking more about money and relationships. And we wanted to dive deeper today into the prenup conversation because a lot of the times that is a topic that can be charged or taboo when you're dating or when you're looking to take that next step in your relationship. So we really wanted to dive in and help the audience here like figure out how they have that conversation. Why is it something they should consider? And so, with Kara's background, having experience as a lawyer in this space, and also being a marriage and divorce coach, I thought that she'd have some great input and insight from that perspective. And then, from my perspective as a money coach, just really helping women and arming them with the tools to not only manage their money, but communicate about that, including in their relationships. So, hi, Kara. You want to say hi to everybody?
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be back here with Elizabeth for round two of the money conversation series. Like Elizabeth said, there's just a lot of um, alignment in what each of us do and how we serve our clients. And this is a really important topic to discuss with your partner before you get married. And oftentimes, entering into a prenup will sort of spark the conversation. So, hopefully, what we share today will be helpful for all of you out there who are either um, considering a prenup or even a postnup. Would also be a great opportunity to have this conversation.
Yeah. So, Kara, I want to start just at the beginning because this is something you and I both have in common. From my perspective, I was married before, and in that marriage, I did not have a prenup, and it's not something I even thought to bring up, right? It was actually a little uncomfortable. And now in my second marriage, it's something that I did do and had a conversation about with my husband early. So, from your experience, when should you really start this conversation, and why is it important to start it early?
So, first things first, I want to just echo what you said, which is yes, this conversation about a prenup. I was married before too, and we also did not have a prenup. And I think there's this idea. Well, I feel like there's a couple of stigmas against it, which is one, you know, entering into a prenup like presupposes that we're going to get divorced. Like we're already thinking about divorce and we're not even married yet. So that's one stigma, which we can maybe break down some stigmas later on. But the other one is, well, we're not super wealthy. Neither of us have been married before, right? And so the first thing that I want to make clear is that prenups are not just for wealthy people. They are not just for people who are getting remarried. Um, and they can really benefit everyone. That being said, like Elizabeth said, it is important to start this conversation early. So I recommend incorporating it into your wedding planning. And, you're choosing a venue, you're choosing all of these different vendors. All of this thought and planning goes into one day. And a prenup really helps you have conversations that's going to help you plan your life together. So it's important to start that conversation early as like incorporating it into your wedding planning, like an essential component of wedding planning, because weddings are about marriage, right? And so it's how are we preparing for marriage? So that being said, because of the stigma and just because it may be the first time you're really talking about certain topics like finances with your spouse in the context of a prenup, it is important to start early because it can be an emotionally charged topic. We a couple is two individuals coming together, committing to each other, and they've decided they want to build a life together, but they're coming in with all of their personal history and thoughts and feelings about money. And so, of course, if there's any sort of misalignment or we're not on the same page about certain things, like that can be very emotionally triggering, just based on our own personal histories. So I'm interested. I know that's something that you explore with your clients, Elizabeth. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things I see is how do you even bring up this topic? If you haven't really talked about money in your relationship and now you are talking about taking the next step, what is the best way to even broach the conversation so that, because I think a lot of the times there's fear around bringing up the topic and then it may be causing a conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I say to that is just create the space where you give each other permission to be honest and vulnerable. And that could look like just scheduling a date and knowing that, okay, this is something I want to talk about, and I really want to make sure we have the time committed to focus on this conversation. So treating it like a date so you can give each other 100% of your focus. And maybe just even starting with your own individual's experience with money. So that can give your partner some insight into why you want to have the conversation and where you may be coming from, and also open the door for them to be honest with you about their experience and their feelings around it. I think the other important thing too is not to make that first conversation necessarily need to have like a solution in that conversation. It's just opening up the door to continue it. So maybe the goal is just to come to the conversation and kind of talk about where you're coming from, and then agree in your next conversation to like decide how you want to move forward. I think that also can take some of the pressure off of feeling like, okay, we're talking about this topic that is tough to talk about. It may be hard to bring up some of the feelings that we have. And now we also have to decide in the same conversation what we're going to do next. So I think taking that pressure off also helps to create that atmosphere where you feel a little bit more comfortable to talk about it with each other. What about you, Kira?
Yeah, I love what you just shared. And that kind of speaks to the point of starting these conversations early so that you can make it more of a relaxed atmosphere. You don't feel like you have a certain deadline you have to reach. You don't feel pressured to come up with all of the answers. It's how can we make this as least pressure as possible, and actually approach it with curiosity and, oh, I want to learn more about you, and where does that come from. So if you can't talk about these things now when you are engaged to be married and you're in that blissful space of planning a wedding, if you can't talk about it now, imagine how difficult it would be to talk about it after you're married if an issue or a challenge comes up, which it will. And so if you haven't established this foundation of getting comfortable talking about money with your partner, it can make it that much more difficult in the future to resolve problems together. I'm curious to know, Elizabeth, how do you, because with my marriage prep that I offer people, I really focus on self-discovery, of getting clarity of who am I and what do I actually want in life, and how does my relationship fit into that. So I really firmly believe in doing that self-discovery in order to create a stronger relationship with your partner. So I'm curious how you approach that specifically with money with your clients.
It's actually very similar. So one of the things that I'll do with my couples clients is have them do an individual exercise where they reflect on their own values, experience, and what they not only want from the relationship when it comes to money, but what they want to bring into the relationship when it comes to money. And the reason I say both is because you're really going into the relationship as a team, and you want to keep that in mind. You're not going in to be against each other. You're going in to work on whatever comes your way together. And I think establishing that early will help you tackle some of the money topics that come up and not necessarily feel like money's the problem, but there's just a situation that you want to work together to solve.
Mm-hmm.
And then on that, Kara, I really like what you said earlier, and I wanted to touch on that a little bit because this actually is a question that I had recently from one of my clients, which is I don't really have a lot of assets. I don't have a lot of money. I don't own a lot. Like, I don't really feel like I need a prenup, and my partner is in the same boat. So it doesn't really feel like it's a good investment for us.
Mm.
What advice would you give somebody in that situation? And why do you think they may want to consider it? Or like what's different perspective that you can offer?
So that's a very common perspective to have, and it's understandable. That being said, prenups can benefit everyone, and that's because when you get married, you are entering into a contract. It is a legal contract, in addition to whatever sort of spiritual or religious contract you view. But legally, it is a contract that you're entering into. And it's a question of, do I want this contract to be dictated by the laws of my state, which are beyond my control, right? I mean, other than voting, right? We can only control to an extent, like what laws get passed. And, people who have no involvement in our life are making laws that impact our life. So you could either go down that path, which is a lot more unpredictable and you lose power over what you want your life to look like. Or you could go down the path of doing a prenup where you and your spouse, soon to be spouse, decide together what type of life you're going to build together. So even though a prenup covers what happens if you get divorced, it embodies or encompasses your goals as a couple, because you're defining what constitutes marital property, right? So in order to agree on that, you have to decide together, do we want it to be all of our income that we earn during the marriage, or do we have other beliefs? And so it's going to prompt these sorts of conversations that you might not otherwise have, because you have to decide what happens if you go get divorced. What happens to the life we've built together? Is one of us maybe more financially dependent on the other? And if so, how do we each view spousal support? And so it's going to give you so much insight into how your partner feels about these topics, as well as give you a lot of opportunities to get on the same page before you get married. And that way, after you're married, there's no surprises, right? Because you've had these conversations so many times, you've each reviewed this agreement so many times before you sign it. And so it gives you a really clear picture of, okay, this is the life we want to build together. If for whatever reason we decide to end the relationship, we have clarity and we have alignment on what we want to happen, as opposed to handing our power over to the legislature in your state. And so that's why prenups can really benefit everyone, regardless of your net worth, regardless of which number of marriage you're on. And it can be an investment up front, but it's worth that investment over the long term, because again, you're investing time to talk about these things before you get married, which is good for the health of your relationship. And you have clarity and more certainty over what happens, which if you get divorced, which releases some of that pressure during marriage. If you already know what's going to happen if you break up, you can stay more present and focused on the relationship and trying to make it healthy and happy. Versus like having this looming question mark over you of, well, if we don't make it, like, I don't know what's going to happen to me. Like, how will I survive? So that's sort of why they can really be beneficial for everybody.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think what I'm hearing from you too is, if you want to think about it in a more positive way, is just using it as a tool to help you as a couple not only talk about all of the different big money topics that you could encounter in your relationship, but make decisions about them. So almost like this is another big decision we want to make, in addition to like wedding venue and how much we're going to spend on the wedding and all that stuff. It's just another tool to help you make the decisions on how you're going to manage your money. And even if something does, if you have it and then you never need to use it, you still have those conversations and can use that to help build your foundation of like, these are the decisions we made together. And then also open the door if you want to change those things going forward.
Mm-hmm.
For somebody who is considering having this discussion and they want to broach it with their partner, they're already kind of talking about a timeline for their wedding, how much lead time do you think a couple should give themselves to like start this conversation and start the process?
So to give you some context, for example, I'm getting married this June. And my fiance and I we retained our lawyers and we started the process back in September. So almost a year before we're getting married.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so happy we did that because, again, it can get emotional. It can get a little tense because we're bringing our feelings about money and trying to, combine them in a way. And so we got it done before the end of 2024. And it was just like a huge weight off of both of our shoulders. And now we can really enjoy these last few months leading up to our wedding, bachelorette party, and, just being present in the moment I've had cases before where people come to you 2 weeks before their wedding and say they want to do a prenup. And that's not realistic. That's going to create an atmosphere of pressure, feeling like we got to figure out something. And when we feel that pressure, we feel under stress. It impacts how we show up, and it sort of narrows the field or vision of what options or solutions we might have. Whereas if you give yourself plenty of lead time, like I would say 6 months at a minimum would be ideal if you have 6 months. If you're doing a shorter engagement, maybe 3 months, but anything a month or closer, I would avoid. I would get started earlier than that. You don't want to be doing this in the last month or two leading up to your wedding. So that would be my recommendation, but I'm curious as to how you feel about it.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think it's almost like the thing that came to mind, it might sound a little funny, it's like eat the frog, which is like kind of tackle the most challenging piece first. And I know a lot of money is one of those challenging pieces. So I agree to do it early and then give yourself the space to really enjoy the wedding planning and kind of have that pressure off. So you don't feel like getting closer to that you have like another thing that's really putting pressure on the both of you. I think it also just gives you insight to your partner and can be a process you go through that brings you closer to, because you're really building a solid foundation together beyond just the wedding day. So I totally agree, like the sooner you can start that and give yourself plenty of time, the better. Can you kind of give us a little bit more details on what to expect from the process? Like maybe for those of you listening, like what is a prenup? What do you kind of expect? Because you mentioned you both had to retain your own lawyers, which I don't think everybody knows that. Maybe give some insight into what that looks like, and then just kind of a high level, like what to expect from the process.
Yes. So a prenup is a contract that explains what happens to your assets and income in the event of divorce. So are assets going to be classified as, what constitutes marital property, what constitutes non-marital, what are the parameters around spousal support, what do we want our choice of law to be? What about if we acquire a home, right? Those are all of these what ifs. And you can get as detailed as you want. You can be very specific. You can be more high level. It really depends on your specific situation. That's a prenup in a nutshell. How the process usually works is, yes, each of you should get your own attorney, because divorce, and inherent in divorce is that sort of idea of me versus you, which I hate saying that, but like when you have conflicting interests like that, you need separate independent legal representation. And it's not because you guys aren't working together as a team, it's just because of the law. It's really just ethics. It's what's been set in the law up until this point. So bear that in mind when thinking about your budget, is that each of you will have an attorney. And some of you may be thinking, Kara, you're a divorce attorney. Why did you get your own attorney for your prenup? And that's because I wanted somebody objective on the outside to help me stay grounded. Again, it can be very emotional, and I was not immune to that. It was intense. It went well, but even amicable prenups bring up emotions. Mm-hmm. So it's really important to have a professional who's not involved in your life at all, who is able to think outside the box, is not feeling the emotions that you're feeling, to just help you through the process. So how the process typically works is one attorney will put together a draft, but before you even get to that point, you and your partner should be starting these discussions. So ideally, the way a prenup should go is each of you gets informed of what your rights would be under the law so that you have that knowledge. And then you and your partner come together and talk about, well, what do we want to be classified as marital, like how do we want to define marital property? Or how does each of us feel about spousal support? You have those discussions and you come to an agreement on what you want together. And then you communicate that to your attorneys. That's going to make it less adversarial because you're working together as a team. And then your attorneys, of course, will advise you if something is not permissible or not in your best interest. But for the most part, your attorneys are just making your agreement a formal legal document. And so again, it's not me versus you. It's here's what we agree on together. Okay, attorneys, now put pen to paper. So that's sort of how I view the ideal sort of prenup scenario, where it's not a case where my attorney sends a draft to your attorney and it has all of these things in it that me and my partner have never talked about. My partner gets caught off guard and is like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And then his attorney sort of amping him up, like this isn't fair or what have you. You can see how it can just spiral from there. Mm-hmm. So communicate and reach terms together as a couple as much as possible, and then tell your attorneys. The last thing I'll add before I flip it back to you is, as part of the prenup process, each of you has to disclose all of your assets and income. And so what you will have attached to your agreement is a schedule for each of you listing out what your premarital property is. So these are the assets and debts I have going into the marriage. That way, each of you can make informed decisions about any sort of rights that you're waiving or the terms of your agreement, because you have all of the information as of the date of your marriage. You have a full picture of the landscape financially, and then you can make those informed decisions.
Yeah, I love that. I want to call out two things that, just to reemphasize from what you said. I like your point that you made about the need to have your own individual representation is really something from the law. So it's, again, not that you guys are against each other. And the other thing that kind of helped me put it into a more positive perspective is, if I am going to invest the money into a prenup, I want to make sure it's like compliant with the law. And part of being compliant is having my own representation. And then also having just somebody that can explain things to me and has my interest as their priority. So it can just be very neutral and doesn't have to be like we're teaming up against each other. It's just another part of the process. So I really like that you called that out. The other thing I would say is, I totally would agree with what Kara's saying, is to have that discussion before going into the process, so you are already aligned and can make the process a lot easier on both of you. And you mentioned something like, as far as like property and how you want to divide property. And to put that into some of the terms when you talk about money, it's like those discussions you have about, do we have joint accounts? Do we have separate accounts, or do we have a mix of both? If I own a business, what is your involvement in that from a financial perspective? Retirement and, like you said, spousal support, how do we feel about that? So it's really just talking about how you want to share money and maybe keep some of your own autonomy when it comes to money. Does that kind of help, Kara, or is that in line with what you were saying about property?
Yes, it's 100%. It's going to spark discussions both about the big picture, as well as all of the details that impact your day to day. Like you said, if we don't have a joint account, are we going to open one? What are we going to do with our premarital bank accounts? Are we going to be, transferring all those funds into a joint account after we get married, or are we going to keep them separate? I always recommend keeping at least one separate bank account. But yeah, it's really view money and assets and debts that we have going into this marriage. How will they be handled during the marriage, and how will we acquire assets in the future? What is our plan for that? And how do we want those things to be handled?
Yeah. So one thing that comes to mind too is, how do you what to expect from the cost of doing a prenup, and what are some ways to help avoid overspending during the process?
Mm-hmm. So I would say, you would most likely pay a retainer up front, which can range anywhere from 1,500 to 5,000. It depends on where you're located. Obviously, like me in New York City, it's going to be more expensive than somebody in rural Kansas. So it really is depending on your location. Some thought will also go into what is the complexity of this prenup. And that might impact the retainer you pay up front if your attorney anticipates it being more complex. But basically, your attorney will request a retainer fee that you will pay when you sign your engagement agreement with your attorney. And your attorney will get to work and track their time. And basically, every month, they will issue a statement detailing everything that they did on your case in the last month, date, description, amount of time spent, hourly rate, total fees incurred. And then basically initially they hold your retainer in a trust account because they haven't earned it yet. So as they earn it, they will transfer money over from the trust account into their operating account as earned fees. And so in an ideal world, your retainer will cover all of those fees for the prenup process. And you won't be coming out of pocket above and beyond that. Or who knows, maybe you even may get some of it back, right? Maybe it's a very straightforward process. Your attorney only uses a portion of the retainer and you get the rest back. If it is a situation where your attorney goes through your retainer and is still working on your prenup, if to the extent they incur fees above and beyond the retainer, then you will be billed separately for that. So usually you'll receive an invoice and that will be payable within a certain period of time. Ways to sort of stay on top of the spending. Again, what we just talked about, which is having as much conversations, reaching as many agreements as possible directly with your spouse, and then telling those agreements to your attorney, as opposed to one attorney just putting together a draft, sending it to your partner's attorney, that attorney marking it all up and going back and forth and back and forth. That is what can really rack up those fees. So get on the same page with your spouse first, and then direct your attorney, let your attorney know we're ready to start drafting. Another thing that you can do to keep spending in check is to just follow the law and do what your attorney says. because some people are really resistant, for example, to disclose their financial information. And you have to do that in order for a prenup to be valid. So the more you resist doing certain things that you're required to do, the more your attorney has to follow up with you, the more emails and phone calls your attorney has to have with you to explain over and over, you need to do XYZ. So that's another example. You know, you got to trust your attorney. They're the one who you hired to do this job and to represent you. So follow their lead and just try to be as efficient as possible.
And when you say retainer, is that kind of thinking about it like a kind of like a deposit or a down payment? Would that be like a good way to think about it?
Yeah, that's a really good comparison.
Okay. And then when you were saying like some ways to avoid overspending, because I think that alludes to, so if you're having the conversation early and you're aligned with your partner, kind of the direction you want to go, and then you also talk during the process to make sure that you're aligned on any like questions that come up or anything that you guys didn't really cover in your initial conversations. That essentially helps to reduce the additional hours that your lawyer might spend or your attorney might spend on the process, right? Or even help to make sure that your retainer covers all or most of it versus like adding on additional hours. Is that right?
Yeah. So, for example, if your attorney sends the first draft, your partner's attorney receives it, goes over it with your partner, and his attorney raises a couple of issues. Okay. So then we pause. That's the time when you and your partner come together to chat. We don't just immediately have our attorney send a red line back to our attorney, because that's how you get into the back and forth. So as soon as an issue becomes apparent, that's when we step away from attorneys, we come together, we talk about it, we try to come to resolution together, and then you report back to your attorney. And so that's going to minimize that back and forth and, attorneys explaining why certain things should be in the agreement versus should not be in the agreement. It can really spiral out of control. So it's really about taking power over the process, because this is your life, right? So take as much power over the process as you can, because you're defining what your life looks like.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. The other thing that came to mind too is I think this is a great opportunity, if you haven't, is to implement your money dates. And money dates are what I have my couples schedule regularly, and the purpose of them is just to have a consistent conversation about your money. You talk about your budget, your goals, what's working, what's not working, anything you want to focus on coming up. This is a great tool or opportunity to implement those, and you can have your money date schedule and use them through the prenup process to talk about anything that might come up. So it already gives you that space to address anything before you go back to the lawyers to execute whatever you agree on.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I love that. And I know that we're going to be talking about that next month.
Yes.
But I love this idea of, like you said, like setting up that schedule already in the prenup process. You're laying that foundation for the marriage. You are setting aside a specific time to talk about it versus having to like approach your partner with like your tail between your legs, feeling like nervous of like, oh, we got to talk about this. Like you already know day, time, place where you're going to talk about it. So it can sort of relieve some of that pressure and again, help you just get more comfortable with talking about money.
Yeah. Is there anything else you can think of as far as what to expect from the process, or anything that would help those listening just feel a little bit more at ease to consider it if they are considering marriage as their next step in the relationship?
Yeah, so I would just sum it up as this is a way that you can take control over your future, no matter what happens. So, whether you stay happily married for the rest of your life or whether it doesn't work out, you are defining the narrative of your life, both individually and as a couple. So, this is a really great opportunity as opposed to just leaving it up in the air, leaving it uncertain, and ideally you sign this and you put it in a drawer and you never look at it again. But you have that peace of mind, and think about how amazing it would be to just be present in your marriage and not worry about what happens if this doesn't work out. So it's an opportunity, and it doesn't mean you're going to get divorced. And it's going to help you lay that foundation for a happy marriage and effective communication. How about you? Any final thoughts?
Yeah, 100% I agree. I think it's an investment either way. If you don't need to use it and you don't get divorced, I still think it's a great investment in having a strong foundation for that money conversation, because if you can tackle a hard topic like this, it equips you to attack even things that are outside of money conversations. You are merging two individual lives and working on building a life that you want together. And I think if you can get through this conversation and really make those big decisions, it helps you to continue that conversation and continue to make big decisions together, and even gives you opportunity to change things if, because life is going to change. So either way, I think of it as an investment. And I love how you put it, Kara, is just taking control of the process and having a say over what happens in your life as an individual and your life as a couple.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, like Kara said, we are going to continue the money conversation. We're going to talk more about putting romance back into money. So be on the lookout for that in February.
Yes. Well, as always, Elizabeth, so fun to chat with you. And I'm excited for next time. And if anybody has questions or want to share anything, feel free to just comment on whatever social media outlet you're using. If you have follow-up questions for us, let us know. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.